Okay, welcome to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob Dove, and this is the place and the space where we get to talk about some large concepts that are good for your soul. So we've got a guest today who I would call a miracle. Now, we're all miracles in our own right, and that's for sure. But Ken Parme should not be alive at this point, according to all the statistics and most doctors.
Yep.
And you'll hear more about that story very shortly, but he sits here before me, still smiling and very much alive, so that's great to see. Ken's been married for 45 years. He's got 4 kids and 6 grandchildren.
Yep.
He worked as an inspector in custom fabrication involving safety valve and piping systems for the nuclear industry.
Yep.
He was diagnosed in 2012 with inoperable pancreatic cancer. And as many of us know, that's pretty much a death sentence. And those doctors said that the stats were as such that there's about a 95% chance that he would die within 5 years. Well, that was 10 years ago.
That's right.
That's right. Here he is with us. But I can tell you from reading 2 books that he wrote, especially the first one with his wife, Becky, that his journey has been quite interesting. And I'm not going to say much more because I'm going to turn the mic over to Ken. Ken, if you would start with your childhood, though, and
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
And this is the first time Bob and I have actually seen each other face to face since about 5 years, and with COVID and everything, time's just flying right by. So I'm glad to be here. And, I grew up right here in Pittsburgh in a little community, Beachview. And I grew up there through the 60s and early 70s. And then my parents moved over into Green Tree. And I ended up going to Keystone Oaks High School. And then when I graduated from high school, my wife and I, we were both very young Christians. We started a commune. We helped to start a Christian commune, and that lasted about 2 years, and it was a lot of fun. But we had a beast by the tail there. Being young kids, we were not easy to convince sometimes. When you're young, everything, and that's the way life works.
Well, how would you define that word, commune?
Well, we all lived in an apartment building. We all had separate apartments, and everybody only kept what they needed to live. And then we would put all the rest of the money in the middle, and we would help people from the churches that we knew. Like we were able to help single moms, help buy cars for them, different things like that. We would just look for where the needs were and meet them as we could. And it was really, we did really well for a couple years. But then too much weird doctrine started to get settled in, and people are just human beings. And it just, we decided after a couple years, my wife and I decided we should leave. One of the main issues, I think, was the doctrine of man being head over the woman. A lot of the guys really wanted to press that, and I agreed with my wife. That's craziness, and I think being married for 45 years should show that it's not about a man being the head. It's about being a good partner. Both of you's partnering up and working together. That, to me, that's the way to go. And that's where some of the, when you get into the Bible, it has some wonderful advice and it has some terrible advice. And you got to, if you're going to go at that, you better filter out which is which,
I'm going to drive you back in time now and just say, okay, in what denomination were you raised?
Well, yeah, I was raised.
How did this happen that you and your wife got together to begin with?
Well, I was raised a Catholic, and actually, though, I was sort of an atheist because my sister died when I was very young, and I watched her die. She had leukemia, and she was only 7. And just seeing her go through that, after she was gone, the next few years, I just figured there can't be a God to let a little kid go through something like that. So I just kind of ignored everything about God, and I enjoyed doing drugs and, hanging out. And then what happened was I had a friend. We were working at the Marriott Hotel, and he said, if you come to a Bible study with me, I'll get you a date with my sister.
And there's a deal.
And his sister was pretty hot. I said, yeah, I would like that. I said, I'll go. So we did. We actually went to the Bible study, and I met a girl at the Bible study who eventually we married, So I didn't marry the girl that I went on the date
wasn't
with.
The sister.
But I married a girl that was from the Bible study, Becky. And so that's where we met, And then what happened was, we were young and knew everything, and we were going to live on love. And so we got married right out of high school, pretty much, and got in the commune there. And that lasted a couple of years till we felt there was a few different reasons. But I think a lot of it was just the doctrine was getting goofy, and being young, we didn't have any real guidance. We were going to a non-denominational church at the time, but they were young too. You know what I mean? And you do what you do.
Sounds like the 60s to me.
Yeah, well, it was the mid-70s,
Okay.
actually. Yeah, but close enough, I guess. Yeah. And like I say, it worked really well for a time. And then it was time to go, and so we ended up leaving there, And like I say, I think it was good for the men, not so much for the women. And eventually everybody ended up disbanding after a few years,
Right.
That's all hard. And I'll tell you what, I felt for like my one friend who actually was the starter of everything. He had a kid and was having another kid. And that's a rough way to raise kids sometimes. You know what I mean? The scheduling's hard, and so, But it was fun at the time for the guys.
Right. Yeah, I can remember in the 70s, I guess, I was part of a commune up at Penn State.
Oh, is that right?
I was working on my master's degree up there and joined a commune.
Okay.
So I understand the kind of lifestyle you're talking about. And
there's a definite benefit to it. I mean, everybody's bills were paid, everybody's taken care of, But
Right.
Trouble seeps in, too, was when some people wanted a lot more than others. And so it can really get goofy, So we were glad to leave. I was glad to go and glad to leave, And most churches have been that way with me. Yeah, I've only been actually to a couple, but they were good to start, and then it was time to go.
Yeah. So what happened next?
Well, after we got married, we started having kids, and I went back to school. And actually, I first went back to school to be a mechanic. And when I graduated, they were only paying mechanics at the time. I think it was $1.85 an hour, and I had 2 kids already. So I just kept doing construction for a few more years, and then I ended up working at Allegheny Valley School. And then I went to school again at night turn. I started to go for nursing, but I have a bad memory, so I thought I don't really want to be a nurse. So I got into this non-destructive testing, they showed me a nice film and a guy come out and he was reading x-rays over a nice light and he had coffee on the table and it looked great. I said, okay, I'll do that. And so we went to school for a couple of years for that, and I ended up getting a job as a radiographer. And the first job I had to be down in Albright, West Virginia at 2:00 in the morning to x-ray boiler tubes.
Oh, my.
I was like, hey, they didn't show me this in that film, But I ended up in that field for, technically the rest of my working days, till I had to retire, from a disability. But I've always enjoyed it. It was always an interesting field, and especially when we moved into doing like nuclear work and things like that. It's very stressful.
Yeah. Well, I was curious because, the way that we met, we worked, the place is called Cancer Bridges now.
Right.
But we both covered the front desk there for a period of time, and we ended up doing a writing group together.
Right. That was fun. It was very fun.
But I was curious because in working in the nuclear industry and having pancreatic cancer, was there any relationship between those two events?
Oh, no one knows. Everything's a wild guess when it comes to pancreatic cancer. Nobody knows how it starts. One thing they do know is that it starts 20 years before you actually see it as microscopic cells in your pancreas. And they found this in studying cadavers, that it actually starts 20 years before you ever see it as a tumor. So that's a long time for that thing to gestate like that, And pancreatic cancer, another bad thing with that is that the symptoms are so vague at first, and this is why a lot of people end up getting checked too late. When I first got diagnosed, my doctor told me that 98% of the people that get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer were misdiagnosed for the first few months at least, because you just think it's back pain or chest pain. I thought I pulled a muscle, and that's just the way it goes, But fortunately for me, my wife and I, we were big walkers, and she would walk with me, but I could usually walk way faster than her, but she was like killing me anymore, and I was just exhausted. She said, you need to see a doctor. I said, yeah, you're probably right. So I went to the PCP, and they did blood work and all this. And he said, oh, my God, your sugar's off the charts. He said, you're a diabetic. So he started me right on insulin. Well, I went home. I told my wife, and she said, well, that's pretty weird because you eat good, you exercise. She said, I think you need to see an endocrinologist. So we made an appointment, and I went to see the endocrinologist, and she said, I don't like what I'm hearing. I'm going to send you for a CT scan right now. And she did. She sent me right over to Shadyside, and here she had just been a fellow over at the Hillman with these pancreatic cancer doctors. So she called me after the scan, and she said, hey, I need you to come to the office. Well, we knew right then, Yeah. So we get up to the office, and she said, yeah, they found a mass there. They'll have to do a biopsy and everything. She said, but we're pretty sure it's cancer, And if my wife would have never had me call the endocrinologist, I probably would have not lasted another few months. Yeah. I was getting in pretty bad shape. And like I say, the systems were so vague. And when I went to see that doctor, I told her about the pain, and she said, well, diabetes should not cause you any type of pain. You shouldn't be having that pain. And that's one of the things that provoked her to send me to get that. But when I came back to her office, she was so good, man. She had all the doctors I was supposed to see, who I was supposed to talk to, and she had it all laid out for me, man, made appointments. And she's just something else, man. Dr. Levitt, her name is. She's up in Mount Lebanon. A wonderful doctor. And if it wasn't for her, we'd have never caught that cancer.
Well, I can tell you, and if you hold this book up, I reread this little book, and I can tell you there is so much inspiration. It's called In the Gaze of the Divine, Life with pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've gotten a lot of good response we have from this. There was people using it for like their study groups, and they were using it over at McGee for some cancer counseling and stuff for that, you know. And it's the thing about this book is I like it is because you get the view from the caregiver and the patient. Right. You know, and so because my wife's such a faithful journaler, I can go back 40 years and see what a jerk I was. You know, she's just journals like crazy. So we just put her journals down at the same time the things I was going through. And so you get the situation from the view of the caregiver and the patient. I think people relate to that, you know.
Yeah. So there's a lot of spiritual stuff in here. And so far, I haven't heard a lot of spiritual foundation from you. So where did that foundation come from? Because the way that you talk about church, it's sort of like, I can do without it. I can do it. It doesn't matter. So there's something else going on here.
My first years as a Christian, I was an evangelical Christian. You know, fundamentalist, you know, and I really wanted to get to know the Lord better. So I started studying the Bible. Well, about this time, my wife bought me a book by Jack Miles called God, a Biography. And it was just a literary critique of the Old Testament, you know. And he was a former Jesuit himself, so he had a pretty good idea what was going on there. And this had to be in the mid to late 80s. And I started reading books by more critical thinkers about the Bible, like Karen Armstrong and John Spong and Bart Ehrman. There's a lot of real good scholarship out there. But when I started studying like that, I started finding, well, I certainly can't be a fundamentalist. You know, I can't really live this literally, you know what I mean? Because there's just, and when you really start studying the scriptures in a critical manner, you start seeing all kind of crazy contradictions. And so for me, it was hard to say, this is the inerrant word of God, you know? And I just had a discussion with a kid a little while ago about, he said, no, you have to believe every word in the Bible's true. And I asked him a question. I said, well, answer me this. If you lived in the 1860s and the slaves were beginning a revolt, would you help them get free? Or would you say, hey, the Bible says you got to submit to your master? You know, and I never did get a good answer from that person, because there's really no good answer, you know, that you could defend that, you know. And so it becomes an issue scholar-wise, you know. But now, I think if I was to have to identify what I am at this point, I would say it's like a Christian atheist, in the vein of like Meister Eckhart with his prayer, God, rid me of God. Because he knew any God that you could conceive in your mind or think about can't be, because God has to be inconceivable. So Meister Eckhart's prayer was, you know, don't let me deceive myself, you know. Or Thomas Merton, you know, if I think I know you, I'm deceived. You know, if I want to understand you, I know I can't. And he finally ends up with the cry, the darkness is enough, you know. And so I've come back to a point in my life where it's just being able to rest in the mystery. I believe in the divinity, you know, but it's in the divinity of the mystery. And I don't think anybody has the actual answer to these things. And sometimes people, they hold their beliefs so strong and so dogmatic that it causes like a tunnel vision, you know. And like I had a friend, I was trying to get her to read this book by Tony Jones called Did God Kill Jesus? And basically what it is, it's just a explanation into the different ideas Christians have had over the atonement for the last 2,000 years. You know, and every generation had a different spin on that, so to say, you know?
Yeah.
And so you can't just pick one. Tony Jones says it's like a garden, or Jack Miles, even when I had read that book, I remember him writing that the scriptures are like a giant stained glass window. You can't just look at one part. You have to see it as a whole. And that always made sense to me, that sort of thinking, Because when you try picking one piece here and one piece there, it's not going to work out, But even though I don't particularly have faith in that Bible type God, I certainly cannot deny the influence that touches with the divine have had in my life. So I don't question the experience, but I just understand now I'm not going to know the answer. And I have to be able to rest in that.
Yeah.
Like we all do, And so it's opened my faith for me in new ways, And I think for me, it's been much more realistic. It makes faith much more real. It's not like having to believe in certain fantasies and things like that,
Yeah. Well, in reading this book, and I reread it this week, just in preparation for seeing you again, and I hadn't picked this up for 5 years.
Okay.
So, and I saw new things in it.
Cool.
Things that I didn't notice before, and that's because of my own spiritual journey, and so I have a different lens now. That I looked at this with. And I know that you quote Richard Rohr in here.
I'm a big Richard Rohr fan.
And so am I.
Yeah.
I love Richard Rohr.
His books, when I was in chemo, his books, I think he was writing like The Immortal Diamond and a couple other ones. One I really liked was Falling Upward, about life after the second half of life. And his books helped me really stay centered through that whole ordeal, going through all that chemo and radiation. And he was a big, and it's funny, I wrote him, and he actually has written me back a few times. And he's a really sweet guy. He's a really nice fellow.
I watch him on YouTube a
Yeah,
lot.
I do to give those lectures and stuff.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
I'm more like him with the universal Christ, and I really like that book. I see what he's saying in that, But even Paul, if you go back to the scriptures, Paul said, we don't know any man after the flesh. He was talking about Jesus, because Paul's doctrine was like, boom, Jesus, big Jesus.
Yeah. Well, he had a mystical experience.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, getting back to your book, In the Gaze of the Divine, there were a couple things that that I made some notes on, and just thinking about your spirituality, and as it is expressed in this book, and your wife, and I've never met Becky, but she seemed to be really in awe of how your faith got you through this whole experience. And toward the end of the book, she looks at her response to this paper mill that's
that was crazy. Yeah, that was crazy.
That you guys, it probably wasn't an Airbnb back then, but it's what we would call an Airbnb now, and you paid top dollar for it, and they forgot to mention that a new paper mill had just been built next to it. And
we were under the impression this was my last vacation.
Yeah.
The doctor said, go take it because it's probably the last time,
Yeah,
so.
right.
So she wanted everything to be perfect, and she scoured the internet for weeks finding the right place and really working on it. And it was a beautiful place. It just, like you say, they didn't mention there was a mill across there.
Yeah. But she compared your handling that experience with the way that she dealt with the experience, and just how serene you were able to deal with that. And earlier in the book, you really talk about living in the now, living in the present, it reminded me of Eckhart Tolle, and his concept of living in the now. And you even wrote a poem on the now. So there are a couple of things in the book. On page 37, and if you would take a look at page 37, because I may ask you to read a little bit from that. Because what this focused on that got to me is that we are not separate from God. And that resonates a lot with my own spiritual journey. So feel free just to read what you said about it there.
Well, this I'll read one of Becky's logs here from August 8th. This is when I was told that they weren't going to be able to operate. I did a whole year of chemo, and they were hoping to shrink this tumor enough that they'd be able to go in and operate, but it just never shrunk enough, and it's wrapped around a bunch of veins and laying on my aorta. So they said it's not a candidate to be resected. So this is after we found that out. Becky writes, she says, initially we were disappointed with the news that surgery is no longer an option. After we talked about it, though, we were thankful the docs were able to see from the scan the danger that would be involved. We appreciate that the docs aren't using Ken as a poke and hope experiment. They are weighing the options carefully, not just hoping something works out. Dr. Bahari told Ken that he is very encouraged with how well he is holding up. He is looking at this as hopeful evidence that the treatment plan is working. But earlier this evening, I was feeling lost, like we were in limbo. Then I remembered a verse that has always brought me hope. What shall separate us from the love of Christ? For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, or principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creation are able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. God was with us yesterday. He was with us today. He will be with us tomorrow. Ken remains hopeful. He is trusting God and living life, and that sounds like a good plan to me. So that's my wife wrote that.
Yeah.
My son, he's a very good editor, and when he went through to edit these, he didn't have to hardly do anything to my wife's journal.
Yeah. I love that term too, poke and hope.
Poke and hope, man, yeah. Because I think for surgeons especially, it's important to know when not to go in as it is when to go in,
Right.
And so we were very fortunate having the doctors from Hillman at the time, Dr. Bahari, he's over at Allegheny General now, and Dr. Zay is in Texas. But the other doctors they have over there are excellent. I'm very impressed with the doctors that I've met. I have a GI doc. She has to replace my stent in my bile duct every year. This would be my 11th stent, and she's just amazing, man. She gets in there and gets out, and she does it all within a couple hours, and it's just astounding to me that they can do that.
So have you considered, because it's been a while since this came out, of doing a second edition with an update?
I'll tell you, it floated through my mind, but not really seriously. The thing about writing, I've been real into sketching lately, and I find it right now really good for me. The thing about writing, by the time you're done writing it, you hate it because you've read it 9,000 times, and so by the time you're done, you don't even want to see it again, and so writing has its pros and its cons for me. Unfortunately, I don't have the passion for it like my son has, but it's something I enjoy doing.
So you switch your creative outlet to sketching now?
Yeah, I've been sketching a whole lot, and music, sketching and doing music, and it's just where I am right now. We're fluid, and I think we should stay fluid. I think it's really not good if you get stuck in just one thing all the time. You lose a lot of perspectives that you might be able to attain. And that's what bothered me so much, I think, about fundamentalism. There's just no room for nothing else. you know?
Yeah.
And it's a big world, man. And look at the James Webb now. You know, we're seeing, 14 billion years back in time. It's insane.
Yeah.
You know, so why do you want to keep God real small? You know what I mean? He's so big. Let it go, man. Let it go.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other piece of it. We're so big. So why should we keep ourselves so narrow, too?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And it's easy to say that sometimes, you know what I mean? But living in practical life sometimes, especially, with sickness, you get good days and bad days, and then some days it just seems like, what's going on? And you just learn, like Paul said, he knew how to be a base and he knew how to abound. And I think we need to do that physically too. And that's been the hardest thing for me to deal with, is watching my body just decline piece by piece. I thank God I've lived longer than my parents. They only both lived to 63, and I'll be 65 here in a couple of weeks. And so it's getting older, but it's not so much the years that it is the miles, I think. This cancer takes a lot out of you, and then it left me with, diabetes and digestive issues. And then what happened was, because the radiation was so new at the time, they didn't realize how radical it was. So it ended up burning my bowel and my intestines. And so that caused a bunch of issues. And now they have me on a regimen of drugs that they use for people with Crohn's disease, and it seems to be working, so I'm really grateful for that, Yeah. But every day you're going to have to deal with something. And then I look at people that have it so much worse than me that you don't want to complain,
You're still here.
I'm still here. Yeah. So you don't want to bitch about stuff, but you just learn to accept and put yourself in that center. Who was it? St. Bonaventure. It said the circumference is everywhere. And you put yourself in that. You know what I mean? And like you say, you put yourself in that love of God, and you just rest in that, man. And so that was one of my issues, like with the atonement. I had trouble with the atonement in that they teach you that original sin came into the world through one man. Now, everybody's affected with that original sin, whether they believe or not. It doesn't matter. You're affected. You're affected. You don't have to believe or anything. So then they say Jesus comes in with grace and truth, okay? And he raises from the dead, but it doesn't cover everything the way that sin did. You have to believe for that to take effect. Now, why is it that sin could cover everything, but God's grace couldn't? See, so to me, that makes God seem very reactionary, So my point is that I believe if Jesus did rise from the dead, then it covered everything way more than sin did, Yeah. So, but it's not an orthodox doctrine.
Well, you can pronounce that word atonement differently. If you take it apart, you can make it at one-ment.
Yeah.
And then it starts to make sense.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, it's been a journey, and it's a spiritual journey that just keeps going, and that's another, I think, aspect of, people are so afraid that God is going to let them be deceived, and he's not. If you just rest yourself in that center, man, it's like you're there. And like you're saying, you're at one-ment like that, and even your lack is part of that at one-ment. Your lack is a part of you. It's okay. That's part of who you are. And that's part of who God made you. And that was another thing, I think, too, that lately all this people attacking the gay and lesbian community and trans dressing. Leave people alone. It's none of your business what anybody's sexuality is. It's their business and their God or their friend or their parent, but it's not yours. And if you're paying your taxes, What's the difference? I don't care what you are. You're an American. Leave these people alone. And I see that a lot of the Christian church is actually really hateful towards these people. So Christianity's done a lot to kind of ease me out of the way because there's too many things I don't want to be involved in, and that's part of it. And so, we all come to different views on that. And that's where I say, if you're a Bible literalist, then that's probably the stance you're going to take, because I heard the one guy say what happens is people try to interpret love by using the scriptures instead of using the scriptures, to interpret love, or vice versa. You don't interpret love only by how you act towards other people, no matter what the scriptures say. You can pick and choose anywhere you want to, but in the long run, it usually comes down to God is love.
Yeah.
And even John said that, So is it loving to attack these people? And a lot of fundamentalists say, yeah, it is, because we don't want them to go to hell. So, there's always defense for doctrines. The greatest defense for a doctrine I ever heard in my life was from my wife. When she was a teenager, she went up with her sister-in-law, and they went to her church up there, and they were, I think, Church of Christ. And what happened was the pastor said, you got to be baptized. If you're not baptized, you can't go to heaven. So you better get baptized. And my wife says, well, what about the thief on the cross? He wasn't baptized. And Jesus said, you'll be with me today in paradise. And the pastor said, well, God made it rain. That was his baptism. And he was very serious, and we'll go to great lengths to defend what we believe a lot of times,
Sure.
And then you end up signing like crazy, but you don't realize that,
Yeah. In fact, my next interview is with someone who believes a lot in BS. That your belief system is what creates your world. And believing is seeing. It's not the other way around.
Yep.
Because you see what you believe you're going to see.
It's true.
And,
It's true.
It's that lens that you look at life through.
I know. But it really makes me wonder when I see the actions of the right-wing Christian group. Of course, not everybody's like this. It's the extreme. But I don't know how you can reconcile any of that with the idea of following Jesus. It escapes me,
Well, it's
But
that
like you
lens.
say, it's how they're seeing,
Yeah, everyone's got a different perspective.
Oh,
And,
my, yeah.
They say there are 8 billion people in the world, and there are 8 billion perspectives.
When we were first Christians, we used to actually drive around and look for people that we thought might be demon possessed, so that we could go do exorcisms. And it was just insane stuff, but when you're a kid, you need direction. But we weren't going to take any direction anyway, because we were all fired up, and we knew the truth, So it takes a lot for God to deal with a person, you know what I mean, and strip you of all what you believe is belief, but may turn out to be more superstition than belief, And God that's another thing that really, I can hear a testimony from a Muslim, from a Mormon, from a Buddhist about how God touched them in certain ways. And who am I to say, nah, that can't be God?
Yeah.
Who am I to say that? Yeah,
our second podcast interview was with a Muslim. And,
Okay.
And it was a very interesting take on life, because it was foreign to me, and I learned a lot.
Was he born a Muslim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, out of curiosity now, you wrote a second book. And
Oh, the kid book.
yeah, the kid book, The Adventures of
Adventures of-
Madde Mckinsey.
There you go.
And I gotta say, I really love that book, but it was so different from your first book. So how did that come about?
I actually wrote this story about 20 years ago when Maddie was born. That's my granddaughter. She's 23 now. So I wrote this many years ago, and I was going to turn it into a book, and then somehow, I don't know, I just never got around to it, you know. And then after I got sick, I thought, you know, I do want to do something with that book. That's a good story, you know. So my son helped edit it, and I got a friend of mine from Florida, Keith Higbee, to do the artwork. And I think he did a great job on this artwork. And he does this art like one point at a time. It's really incredible, and the pictures are so cool. And so see, like there's the picture of the king and or the
Yeah, don't show it to me.
Yeah,
show it to the camera.
Mike Goodman. Yeah, you can see the pictures there. But Keith did a real nice job on that.
Yeah.
And I did want to do something with that book. And I have granddaughters. I have 3 granddaughters and 3 grandsons. And I worry about the future for them. You know, and 2 of my granddaughters are half Indian. You know, so they're a little darker complected.
Now, when you say Indian, you mean from India?
From India, yeah. Their dad, okay. Raj, he's from India, yeah. And they're the sweetest girls in the world. But I worry that they have to face racism that they shouldn't have to face. And they already have. I mean, these kids in grade school have heard comments and things like that it's heartbreaking, you know? And so part of this book is I'm thinking of them, and I want them to know that they have the power to reject that kind of thinking, and that they don't have to hate that person. They just have to realize it has no meaning in their life whatsoever, you know. And I wrote this book so the girl in here, Maddie, has a best friend, Roxanne, and it shows how important to have that connection it is with a good friend, with someone that's like your sister or your brother. And it brings a special power to the relationship, you know? Right. And as you can see in the book, she's faced with a choice at the end. Being that she's a pixie, she's not allowed to do violence, but she has to destroy this creature that's taken over the world, but she can't do it using violence, so she has to make a decision on what to do. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You get the book on Amazon. But I had my granddaughters in mind, that I want them to know they have that power. You know, they don't have to be pushed around.
Yeah, it's interesting, the power that we have as human beings that we don't know is there. And most of it is the power of choice, because you can choose to accept what somebody else is saying about you, or you can choose not to.
That's right.
But often we don't think about the fact that it's just a choice.
Oh, and especially with teenage girls. Teenage years are rough for anybody, man. You know, and you know, you got to just give kids a break, man. You know, you know, you don't have to treat them mean. There's no reason for that, you know. So.
Well, we are getting toward the end of our time, and I always ask the guest at this point in the conversation if there are some words of wisdom that they would like to leave our audience with. I think I warned you about this. I hope I did.
and I'll tell you the best quote I ever heard for end of life situations, like, you know, it was from Warren Zevon, and he said, "Enjoy every sandwich." And to me, that just captured a world of wisdom in that, you know, enjoy every sandwich. And if living with a terminal disease has taught me anything, it's taught me that every day truly is a gift, you know. So even on my bad days, I try to be grateful, you know what I mean? but every sandwich I do enjoy anymore, even though now I'm mainly on a soft food diet. but I enjoy that even, you know what I mean? If you got to enjoy oatmeal, do it, you know.
So that's Warren. Did you say
Warren Zevon? You remember Warren Zevon? He was a rock and roller, man. He did like Werewolves of London and Carmelita. A lot of good songs. He was kind of out there.
So Zevon?
Yeah. He passed away, I think it's 20 years ago now. And I always enjoyed his work. And he was actually on David Letterman saying that he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And David Letterman asked him, you know, do you have any words of wisdom? And he said, you know, just enjoy every sandwich. And I think it just hits home. You know?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, this has been a real pleasure seeing you again.
Always good to see you.
Yeah. I can feel your energy, and that's something we're all made of, and that's what makes us one, right? Because we're all energy.
Yeah, for sure.
So I appreciate your being here.
Oh, I'm real glad to come. I really appreciate it.
Like I said, you're a miracle man.
Yeah.
So, audience, as you know, this is the time for you to consider what you've heard today. Take what resonates with you. You can discard the rest. But there are some good words here, and I think you'll find some things worth holding on to. Until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.